Okay, Doug, you want to take it away?
Sure, sure will. Thank you, Marissa. Well, thank you everybody for being here tonight, being on, yet one more virtual round of the Change Academy. We're thinking, maybe next time when we pull together, hopefully in the spring or winter, that we'll be able to come together, who knows, in person. One thing I've really decided I enjoy about Zoom is I can see people's faces. And being in a room together when you have to be masked sometimes even provides its own challenges, especially when you want to read expressions and when you want to speak with a smile. And I wanted to step back a little bit, and I've got a stack here. I've got a stack of books that we've read over the course of a while now, over a couple of years plus. We had a small group that had kind of started like focusing on civil discourse, and we read The Color of Law, and then we've kind of merged as the Change Academy. We read Stamped from the Beginning, and How to Be an Anti-Racist, and The Cooking Gene, and Caste. And I love reading and going deep into some of these kind of critical arguments, and some tough reading as well. It's been really powerful for me. And at the end of each one of these, we have said, okay, now what are the things that we can do as an individual? What are the things that we can do as a community? What can we do as aligned organizations? And that's really what we want to talk about tonight. And we've got a structure for it. And in December of 2020, the city came out with the 2040 or City Plan 2040 with a real emphasis on equity. And we thought, wow, wouldn't it be good to, instead of doing a book, kind of dig into that plan? So that's why we're here tonight, and we're really happy that you're taking the time to be. Oh, okay, it confused me. Sorry. So you're taking the time to be on here, and we're sharing a screen. I will say too that we're going to record tonight, and we'll edit some of this as well, and have it available, because we do want organizations and folks to think about the plan, and they might benefit from the conversation, but we'll do that in kind of an edited way. But that's the start, Marissa.
Sorry, that was not the graceful transition I was hoping it would be. I was hoping it would pop up with, whoops, of course that won't click, what you're talking about, the purpose of the series. So Doug's gone over that already. Doug and I are just going to slide through a couple of pieces of information real quick, and then we're going to turn it over to a couple of really amazing guests. This series has a lot of great partners from throughout the community. So thank you all so much. If you are part of one of these organizations, or if you're part of an organization that is not on this list, please reach out to us and we will amend that. I'm just going to fly through the slides, so don't try to read it all. Quick bit of information on the format of the session. So we're going to dive pretty quickly into a presentation by Chris Chittum, who is an assistant city manager and has headed the planning department. So he's going to talk about the plan far better than we can. And then we're going to get the perspective from a partner, Angela Penn, and we will introduce her in a little bit, and have a little bit of a conversation with them, and then open the floor up to everyone here for a Q&A. Then we'll do the breakout rooms to have a couple of moments of discussion on some questions that we have for you all. And then we'll come back as a whole group to talk about this further. If you have any questions or need anything at any point, just feel free to send a chat to myself or Doug, and we will help you out. Sorry, the mouse keeps moving. There we go. Conversation guidelines. Most of y'all have been here before, so you know this, but it's basic Zoom etiquette. And on top of that, just remember that this is a safe space. While we will be recording these broader big group conversation portions of the evening, when we break into the breakout rooms, I will not be recording. And please remember to use I statements and understand that your truth might be different from someone else's. And then my favorite that I'm personally working on, listen to understand, not to respond. So again, I apologize for flying through, but I really want to get to the good portion of this. A couple of terms I just want to make sure we're all on the same page on. So this is from page 4 of City Plan 2040, because these three terms will come up a lot. And Chris, please correct me if I misexplain any of this. But so there are priorities, policies, and actions within the plan. So the priorities are basically the things that the community has identified as wanting to work on. Policies are basically the guide for how we're going to address those priorities, how we're going to actually work on the things that the community has identified as priorities or issues of need. And then actions are the specific steps. So if there's policies, and then how do you actually implement those policies? And I'm pretty much just quoting directly from the text here, but just so those three things are kind of highlighted and distinguished, just to keep them a little bit separate in our minds. Again, I'm going to keep just flying through here. And let's get to our first very quick discussion question for the whole group before we hear from Chris and Angela. So in 4 minutes or less, let's open up the floor real briefly, real broadly here. You'll have time to discuss specifics more later on. But what are your observations, reactions, or reflections on the interwoven equity section of the plan? So just really broad responses. This is not like reading a book like we've done before, right? This is a real living policy document. So what was it like reading that first section? And I'm going to stop screen share and put this in the chat so we can all see each other. And feel free to just raise your physical hand or your digital hand, or just dive right in.
Marissa?
Yeah, go ahead. I was trying to tell who came up first.
Okay, I thought it was refreshing that they talked about the history of what happened in Roanoke, and it was very clear. There was no beating around the bush about what happened, and I thought that there was a lot of information in there to so that you knew what some of the policies and actions would be based on.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Katie. I saw your hand up.
Thank you. My hand keeps going away. Yes, I've been very excited when I first heard about the plan, and so excited that I'm working with the Inclusive Cultures Subcommittee, and we are ready to submit our recommendations for educational and dialogue opportunities in neighborhoods. So I can't talk all about them because they haven't been introduced to the commission yet, but that's what we're doing. And as I said, I've been very excited about the whole plan and very proud of Roanoke City and its leadership.
Great, thank you. I see Marilyn's hand up. Oh, you're muted, Marilyn.
Sorry. My initial reaction was, wow, this is quite an ambitious plan. At my age, I realized 20 years can go by before you realize it. But yet, I just think it's a fabulous plan. I didn't see anything in there that I didn't feel needed to be addressed. So anyway, that was my initial reaction.
Thank you. Val, I see your hand up.
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. I just want to say, like, I'm just so impressed with our city, because having LGBTQ family members and whatnot, I'm just so grateful and appreciative to be in a community that is so open and so welcoming and wants to just, you know, have such a great focus on diversity and inclusivity and so on and so forth. So thank you to all of you, and thank you to Roanoke.
Thank you. Thomas, go ahead.
Thanks, Marissa. So I'm still early jumping into this. I was kind of late to RSVP, but I'm really excited to be a part of this discussion. And my first impression, just kind of giving it a cursory look, is that there is a key word I noticed on the summary page about trust. And I thought that that might be an important theme for interwoven equity, especially when there's I'm encouraged that it seems like we have all the necessary ingredients internally that are needed for making progress for some of these goals. But it seems to me that that's going to be maybe a primary objective, and I really am excited to see how the reconstruction, rebuilding, and preservation of trust gets woven into this plan.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Let's go ahead, if there are no other broad comments, and dive into our first headliner of the evening. Doug, do you want to take it away?
Sure, I'm happy to, Marissa, and I'm happy to introduce Chris Chittum. Beth Macy, locally our favorite writer, talks about how important it is that she has spent 27 years or 28 years in the community to be able to go deep. And Chris Chittum is another great example of that. And he's worked for the city for 28 years now. And you heard Marissa introduce him with a title of Assistant City Manager. And that's a new title. He's been with us in the past as the Director of Planning. You can see why he's well equipped to step into a role of Assistant City Manager, because planning is such a big encompassing area. As part of planning, which he's overseen for a long time now, he's focused on, long-term planning, the development oversight, neighborhood services, community resources, and code enforcement, which covers a lot. And one thing that's always impressed me in the 2 years that I've worked at the city, and long before that as well, is Chris's commitment. The values that we're reading about in the plan, as I read those, I think about Chris personally as well. And that's a really critical factor in community leadership. And Chris is a native of Roanoke, and he has both a BA and a master's in public administration from Virginia Tech. And he's learning how to sail. That's my introduction to Chris.
All right. Thank you, Doug. I thought I hit the wrong buttons here. Anyway, well, thank you, and thanks for that kind introduction. I am learning how to sail, so that's I always like teaching myself new things. So that's a lot of fun. And wow, I was just had a giving a talk with the state planning conference that was in Roanoke last week, and Wayne Leftwich, who led development of the plan, and I did a brief talk on the Interwoven Equity section of the plan, and how we are implementing it. And so I get to kind of do Wayne's part, which was talking more about the what's in the plan content, and I think Angela will talk more about the big implementation piece that's going on right now. So comprehensive plan for, I'll go back to the basics. Comprehensive plan, every city has one, every city county has one, probably in the United States, and certainly everyone in Virginia. It's a mandate and has been since I think the 20s that cities, counties, and towns engage in long-range planning for their future. And so our last plan was adopted in let me do the math, 2001, and so we just updated our comprehensive plan. It was a 3-year process. It involved a lot of the community in the development of that plan, and we had hundreds of people that we would drag out to a lot of meetings and surveys and chase people down at beer festivals even to get their opinions on things. So it was definitely an engagement of the community, because we really can't as planners do our jobs well without that kind of community engagement. So That being said, it's certainly not something that I did alone, and certainly not anything that even our staff did alone. It took the work of a lot of folks, including those on the planning commission, who kind of adopted different themes, and Angela will talk about the one that she adopted when she was in that role. So if you had to do the Reader's Digest version of the comprehensive plan, and get on our planroanoke.org website and pull up the plan, and if you look at the big ideas section, that kind of encapsulates, if you don't have 10 minutes to kind of dive in and figure out what's kind of the big ideas that are kind of knitted together to kind of guide us into the future. And some of those big ideas are related to how the physical development of our city, and kind of getting back to more of a neighborhood-based model. We talk about acting locally, and sometimes we can't do our shopping locally. We don't have those opportunities, and so we're starting to think about how we encourage commercial developments in our neighborhoods, because we've been spending a lot of our energy over the past 70 years separating businesses from where people work, go to school, shop, and do all the different things that people do, and separating them out, and creating an environment where we all have to get in a car to go do these things. And likewise, what I think is a real tragedy is the life cycle of people in traditional neighborhoods, what I'll call the ones that really developed out before the 1930s, and post-war suburban neighborhoods, and how somebody goes through their life cycle in a kind of a suburban neighborhood, which is only built for kind of the nuclear family, and if you think about when the kids graduate from school of whatever choice they had, where do they live? They don't have any choices in those kinds of neighborhoods, because you have to be able to afford a large single family dwelling on a large lot, and then likewise, when people get after retirement age and are kind of sick of maintaining that lawn and maintaining that house, where do they go? They cannot stay in the neighborhood. There's nothing in the neighborhood for that. So some of our thinking has been oriented toward what we didn't make up the term, but we adopted it. Called a complete neighborhood, and we have we have complete neighborhoods in Roanoke right now, and they're places where you can live your entire life cycle, and there's a place for you, because there are lots of different housing types. It's not just single family on a large lot, although that may be available, but apartments are available, and townhouses and duplexes, and those types of different housing types are situated in a neighborhood, as opposed to a far-flung apartment complex, so out somewhere else, and then also weaving in the business aspect, the local shopping, the local services and grocery stores, and food places to get food, like in my neighborhood, the co-op, and everybody, most people agree that I run across that the Grandin Village and the Raleigh Court neighborhood is, the Grandin Village area is great. It's awesome. Every neighborhood deserves to have that, and indeed, many of our neighborhoods did have that, and over the years, our neighborhoods have de-densified, and a lot, and two things have happened. The market went away in our close neighborhoods, and then it it moved to suburban areas. So that also pulled a lot of our commercial development into strip centers and into malls. Real opportunity that we're experiencing right now is because they're kind of going under. And so the pull that was once there no longer exists. And indeed, a lot of national retailers are going out of business, and we do have to deal with the vacant mall that's left behind. But it's lots of malls in Roanoke have died since the 50s, and it's kind of like this retail cannibalism, which we talked about in the plan as well. So, and another thing, trying to get where people work, our industrial development. Old model for the last 70 years is build an industrial park, recruit a huge employer, go cut the ribbon, shows up on the news, and really, and that's good. You still got to do that. That's kind of a bread and butter, but also kind of turning inward for our economic development, growing our local businesses and entrepreneurship here in Roanoke with people who are already here, and giving them opportunities to grow rather than kind of chasing down the national retailer or the cheesecake factory or whatever it may be. And so kind of turning inward with that. So the physical development of kind of returning to a complete neighborhood model where all that's kind of mashed in together. It works great because we already have the infrastructure in place. We got the water lines, we got the streets, we got the curb and gutter, the sidewalks, the transit system. All that is already in place to make that work, and we don't have to create it new. We simply have to go back and rethink how we use our land and what we encourage and what we don't encourage. And so that's some of the policy that Marissa talked about, that we're not necessarily making the decision now or to take an action now, but it helps guide when we make a zoning decision in the future. So these policies continue to help us make decisions way into the future, even after some of all the actions, one would hope, get accomplished in the plan. So kind of we were still working with really good policies from 2001 before we adopted this new plan, and indeed carried forward this neighborhood center idea from the old plan into the new plan. So kind of the physical development. One big theme of the plan was how we invest in our people, and obviously a big part of that was the Interwoven Equity chapter theme that we have, and then community health. They're very, very related to one another, and so and in particular, one big intersection is looking at life expectancies in Northwest and Southeast versus Southwest, and you could have a disparity of 10 to 15 years from neighborhood to neighborhood, and I don't know anybody who would find that to be acceptable. And so that's something we've got to work on. Again, that's an intersection of community health and how we tackle some of those issues with obesity and diabetes and heart disease and things like that. And in some ways, we look at what are the buttons we can push to impact some of those outcomes, and that's very, very challenging. We're still working on that, but we know, again, this is more on the policy side. Try to find the things that you can do. We might not have the actions figured out. When it comes to interwoven equity, this is really becoming a best practice among planning, the planning profession. It's baked into our code of ethics, matter of fact, and so we are certainly not unique in tackling interwoven equity as an element of a plan. But I assure you, all the content in there is custom is unique to Roanoke because it came from us as a community. And so that's a good thing that our profession is adopting that. And we have a city council right now that is behind us on that, and that is extraordinarily important. We could not have done this. You would not see the interwoven equity section in the plan 20 years ago because it's too hard. It was it was by far the most difficult part of the plan to work through. And so it's the thing that nobody wants to talk about, and when they do, they kind of get frustrated, and so there's just a lot of kind of emotion and distrust under the surface there that we have to deal with. And indeed, that's exactly why we are doing it, to try to get it out, address it, and help us grow as a city. And so there's a really practical part of it too. If you're a planner, you go into the Melrose neighborhood, which I've gone over there and written neighborhood plans. And one of the things you hear is like, well, we want the stuff that they get over in South Roanoke. And then so we'll say, okay, well, we're going to do some of the stuff that we do. And they're like, no, thank you. We don't have a good history with you of doing things in our neighborhood. And so that's a barrier to improvement. And the city earned that. And the city has a responsibility. I wasn't around, and none of the people really are around, but that's okay. We still have the responsibility for not even rebuilding trust, because it never was there, but starting to build some trust by following up on what we say we're going to do and making this commitment, putting it in writing, acknowledging it, and setting in motion a group that will constantly continue to advocate for these ideas, because we could have worked on it for 20 years and never would have gotten all the things, all the material, all the ideas in there, unless we got extraordinarily lucky. But we wanted to put an ongoing advocacy piece in there, and so the Equity and Empowerment Advisory Board was established by City Council even before the plan was adopted. They couldn't wait. They were ready with the year that we had in 2020. They were ready to go. So several months before adopting the plan, they went ahead and established this board and got working with it. And I don't want to step on Angela's toes with talking about what they're doing, but I'll say that within the city organization on the implementation side, we are working on building these ideas into our budgeting system. But let me tell you, when you start messing with people's money, they start paying attention. And of course, it's not their money, but it's their resources to get their jobs done. So more to come on that. But we are building these ideas into the budgeting process. So that's part of the policy. And that's not necessarily an action, but as we go on, we're talking about what happens as a result of those policies of considering equity in your budgeting system. That's where real impact happens, because it becomes thousands of decisions that are pushing in the same direction, and that's very helpful in advancing what you want to do. And so that's very encouraging. Our city manager, Bob, is fully behind these ideas. And indeed, anybody who worked with the Star City Strong group, which was helping us figure out how to spend $64.5 million, that he has a commitment to working on these things that advance actions and putting resources that will advance these ideas of equity in the city. And again, start to create that trust. So some of what we're doing with the $64 million is it gives us an opportunity to kind of jump on implementation of our comprehensive plan. And so I don't know how long I've been talking so far, Doug, but those are kind of the big ideas, how we physically develop and how we kind of want to go back away from kind of the generic model of malls and strip malls, because you can go to any city and see the mall or the industrial park, but you can't go to every city and see a neighborhood, see the neighborhoods that we have. And so that's an expression of our unique character, which we really value and should. And so it'll be interesting to see how we advance on these ideas, which I think are pretty bold, even though we didn't think them up, but how we respond in Roanoke and how we look in 20 years. So.
Terrific. Thank you, Chris. I think you set the stage really, really well. That was spot on. And we'll have a little time for some questions in just a few minutes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Now we're going to hear from Angela Penn, who, when I reached out to Chris and said, hey, who do you recommend as a community partner to have this conversation with, he immediately said Angela. So thank you so much, Angela, for joining. I'm just going to share a little bit of her bio. So she's worked in housing development for over a decade. She was at the Roanoke Redevelopment and Housing Authority as Vice President of Real Estate Development, and she's now TAP's Vice President for Economic and Real Estate Development. She's been really instrumental in rehabilitation of the Terrace Apartments complex in Grandin, as well as conversion of the old Raleigh Court Elementary School off of Grandin Road into the TAP Head Start site that's over there. And she was a member of the Planning Commission and is also currently a member of the Equity and Empowerment Advisory Board. And she's instantly recognizable on any construction site because of her pink hard hat. And with that, I'll pass it off to Angela.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to join you all tonight. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of the conversation tonight. And as you heard, I had the opportunity to spend some time on the Planning Commission and work with Chris and other staff members as I navigated and learned my way through all of the things that are responsibilities of a Planning Commission member. And just about when I was finishing my last term, it was time to begin that process for the new comprehensive plan. And so they were kind enough to allow me to hang around a bit longer and participate in a lot of those planning sessions. And I focused in on the Interwoven Equity area. And so we, of course, started out with the various meetings and a lot of people participating in those meetings. One of the things that I think that was really instrumental in that process that you see in the plan currently is that we took a moment to hit the pause button because we realized that we didn't have everyone at the table. In the sense that the meetings were held during the daytime. It wasn't convenient for some members of the community to come during the daytime, during lunch. So we needed to have just a little bit of a reset and say, hey, we need to provide some opportunities for folks who want to participate to have their voices heard. And so we ended up having a couple of sessions in the evenings, Gainsborough Library, and I believe there was one at another library. I believe it was in Southeast. And so those sessions were really eye-opening sessions. And it really gave members of the community an opportunity to be heard. And oftentimes, as the facilitator of some of those meetings, there weren't ready answers for the questions that were being asked, but it was more of giving the space for people to fully express how they felt. and what things they felt were some shortcomings that hadn't been addressed in their communities. So that was really an important thing that I think happened in that process. And once we did that, then there was the opportunity, after people felt that they were heard, there was the opportunity to really then engage them in the process of then giving feedback that could go directly into the plan. So I'm really appreciative of city staff for taking the time to kind of step back and really hear what people were saying, that we need to include others. And I think the plan ultimately is stronger for doing that. So fast forward just a little bit, the plan gets approved. There's an opportunity for the Equity and Empowerment Advisory Board, and having participated in that discussion, I felt an interest and applied to be on that advisory board, and my application was accepted. And so now I have an opportunity to work with other community members as we look at the different areas of interwoven equity. There's trust, there's service delivery, there's neighborhood choice, there's inclusion. So we have different groups that are looking at each area of that plan and how we make sure that we are looking at the priorities, looking at those action items, and how can we make recommendations that ultimately will help move interwoven equity and these items forward and make things better for our communities ultimately. And so we're a relatively new board. We've been together about 10 months now. And so we have all kind of dived in each of our respective areas. And for us, we spent some of the time actually trying to learn, because for neighborhood choice, as an example, there are 4 different policies within neighborhood choice. And if you have the opportunity to look at any of those, these are really big and complex issues that aren't able to be solved by one meeting. And so what we've done is taken the time to really kind of educate ourselves on some of the different things. So when we talk about making sure that there is a mix of housing and that there aren't zoning barriers to types of housing for vulnerable citizens, well, really, what does that mean? So we took a whole meeting to talk with Chris about help us understand that. So that we can be educated before we make a recommendation. We took the time to talk with Susan and Casey Bratton in real estate valuation. Help us understand what goes into making assessments on properties. Because one of the questions we got from a citizen was, well, I feel that my property located in this area of the city is not assessed in the same way that other properties are in another area of the city. Well, to unpack that, we really had to learn, well, how do they do this? And it was really educational to understand that it is all data driven, and it is all coming from sales data from the previous year, and that the portion that they actually survey with boots on the ground is a smaller percentage, but they are doing everything by data. And so they are using analysis and programs that are then putting out the information that we all see on our statements to show what our assessed value of our land and our improvements are on our properties. So I think one, that helps to educate citizens that there is a formula for this, and there is not someone subjectively saying, well, these properties we're going to value at this level, and these properties we're going to value at another level. So I think that's important for people to understand. And so then it becomes our job is, how do we communicate that information with the larger citizen population. And that's another subgroup, which is service delivery, which has been looking at how does the city communicate with its citizens? Because our city does a lot of great things, but sometimes all of that information doesn't trickle down to everyone. And so one example would be the renaming of the plaza. That was one of the first things that we addressed as a new board, was to make a recommendation to City Council. And we held a public hearing. We had several meetings. We had a survey that went out. And still, after all of that process, we got the feedback was, well, I didn't know about this, or I didn't have an opportunity to participate. So we still have some work to do in overcoming that. And that group is looking at how do we streamline and make sure that information gets to citizens so that they feel, or that they know, I've heard this information, and either I'm going to make the decision to participate or not participate, but not feel as though they never heard the information to begin with. So that was one example of how that group is looking. It's also looking at the website. How do citizens interface with that city website? Is it user friendly to them? And I know we have a new communication staff person who's great. And I know that the city has been looking at changing some of the website. But that was really kind of one of the things that we did as a group. We just said, everybody go to the website and give us your reflections on how easy it was to use, or maybe what were some of the challenges. And then what are some of the suggestions and feedback that we can give to city staff, or recommendations of how the website appears to a consumer, so that they can get the information more directly without having to maybe do 3 clicks to get to ultimately what they wanted to know in the first place. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. One of the things in neighborhood choice, one of our first things was looking at the concept of greenlining. And essentially there have been lots of parts of our community that were redlined. And so greenlining is a solution to this. And the idea is providing affirmative and proactive information on economic opportunities to communities of color. So essentially we have researched and found resources about whether it's down payment and closing assistance, on whether it's housing counseling education, or whether it's financial education, budgeting, savings, all running the whole gamut. And we've put that information together and are now working with the communications department to say, how do we put this together in a succinct manner that can be provided to members in these communities that were once redlined, so that they will be armed with the information that if they want to become a homeowner, here's where you start. Here's some good information to use. So those are the types of things that we're doing. We're still going through a process as a board where, you have a storming, norming, forming, all of that. And I think we're finding our rhythm as we move along in that. But I will tell you, all of the people who sit on the board and on the subcommittees, every month they're doing the work. Subcommittees for all of these groups are meeting every month and then are coming back to the board to report, here's what's happening in our subcommittee. Here's what we're doing. So the work is happening. I think for us, we all want it to happen really fast, but these are complex issues that we can't address overnight, and it will take us time. One thing I will propose and champion is that we do have public hearings every 3rd month for the Equity and Empowerment Advisory Board. And our last public hearing, we didn't have anyone come to speak or say anything. And so I really want to make sure people know that this group wants to hear from citizens, any concerns. Even if you can't get to the public hearing, you can email Angie O'Brien in the city manager's office. She will make sure that whatever the concern is gets directed to the appropriate subcommittee and that they will look into that. I would just say, please, we're here to do the work and we want to do the work. So please share with us any concerns that you have. So I'll wrap it up here and thank you again for allowing me to share the space so that we can have further dialogue and questions and answers.
Thank you so much for your insight, Angela. It was really fascinating to hear about how all this work is going from another perspective. Let's take a few minutes and see if anybody in the group has any questions for Angela or for Chris before we split into our breakout rooms. Marilyn, you're first.
I guess this is a question for Chris, but maybe it's for Angela too. I'm curious, just briefly, in the big picture, how this plan is different than the plan 20 years ago.
Great question. Well, it's 20 years later, and we would not have talked about this. Nowhere in any plan has there been any acknowledgement of what the city did and the federal government did to the Gainsborough neighborhood. Although, what more profound impact on the city's development could there possibly be? And I think that some of these ideas were embedded, may have been embedded in the 2001 plan, and they're a lot stronger now and more forceful. The idea of the complete neighborhood being essentially a rejection. I think, in the past we have said, well, the suburbs are okay. And I think now we're being a little bit more forceful by saying that that's not a sustainable model. And we've all been kind of sold on it. And I certainly don't fault anybody for that, but it creates it's so damaging in every part of our life in terms of we have to drive to everything, and there's a great deal of isolation and segregation, not only of races that occurs, but also of there's social segregation, there's age segregation, all that kind of occurs, and it happened so slowly, and it was so normal that we didn't really realize what was going on, and now we do, and we've got to think about how we reverse things. The county has been working really hard on what they do with Tanglewood Mall. And it's never going to come back like it was. And now we are starting to deal with the thing that killed Tanglewood Mall off, which is Valley View. And we've got 200,000 square feet of vacancy there. And if you think about all of Williamson Road, parts of Melrose Avenue, and all this that we've created, we've kind of in the past said with our plans, well, we're going to try to fix that up. And the new plan says, why bother? Fix your neighborhoods up and refocus back on what makes us unique and gives us character and creates a better quality of life for the people who live here. And so that's, I think, is a fundamental difference. It's a subtle one, but if you look at the forcefulness of the language in there, when we start talking about the environment, it's like, yeah, y'all, back in 2001 was, we need to be thinking about this. And now we talk about, if we want to survive, we need to be thinking about this. We need to be thinking about it at the local level and really all levels. So absolutely. I mean, that's a great question. I hadn't really thought about that, but see, I was around for the 2001 plan.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But I see Lorraine has her hand up, and then we have a question in the chat we'll get to after Lorraine.
Yes, what Chris just talked about was actually related to my question, just sort of thinking about how Roanoke is always described as one of the most segregated cities in the country. And you talked a little bit about how that is connected to the plan, but I'm wondering, are there concrete things thought about it or sort of planned for in the plan that would address that? I mean, that would somehow affect the fact that we're such a segregated city.
That is a good question. That is, if you do some research on reducing segregation, you'll find none. There really aren't any many techniques, tactics, or strategies you can use for that. That cities can put in place other than fixture zoning. And it goes back to the exact thing that I was talking about. And Roanoke is way too segregated, but you also have to look at how they count. When you hear these metrics, you're getting a little bit of a false comparison because of the way Virginia cities are considered as individual counties, and they're independent. Virginia is the only place that has independent cities, and so it gets way too technical. The fact is, we're kind of midline for a southern city on our amount of segregation, but still, I mean, we ought to do something about it. One thing is to change our housing policies, and that is what we're going to probably see when we start to change some of these zoning districts to open them up to other types of housing. Is we will see a lot of pushback, because every other community that is working on the same issue is seeing this kind of pushback, because people want to protect their way of life, as they put it, and so they see, and I don't consider it a very rational or humane opinion to have, but there are people who think that allowing a duplex down the street is going to ruin their neighborhood, and it's simply not true. And those kinds of decisions and yelling that occurs at planning commission meetings, like Angela has had to endure very many of them. It's not really, we roll in all of our decision making based on the data that we have, what we know, and sometimes decisions get made on emotion or what people think or what people fear, more likely. And so until we can, and also we need to also somehow convince our neighbors in Roanoke County and Salem and Benton to do this, in Botetourt County to do the same thing, because that's just the way it works out. Another insidious thing that does is it affects property values in neighborhoods based on who will buy in your neighborhood. If you live in Melrose, it's really quite insidious, and that's something that we need to think about how that works, and so we're seeing some desegregation. I haven't been able to get in and really look closely at the 2020 data yet to see what's going on, but it's too slow. I'll tell you that it's too slow, And it's something we need to continue to work on however we can. Great question.
Thank you. So we have two questions in the chat. The first is actually related to zoning. Will there be changes in zoning to address working from home?
I'm not sure that, hey, Catherine, I'm not, I don't know what barriers you're seeing with working at home, but we do have quite liberal zoning regulations on home-based businesses. And in fact, this was during Angela's tenure, we took a lot of those from being special exceptions where you had to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and ask, Mother may I, to just by right. So you walk in and get a zoning permit and you can operate your home-based business right away and just get a business license. So if you know of any barriers that we have in place to those, be glad to talk with you about them and see how we might open those up. Our trend is to more and more open that up, and because we simply don't see any problems with them. They are very, very successful, and in fact we permit hundreds of new home-based businesses every year.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Hi, Catherine.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I really appreciate what you've just shared. My experience has been pretty positive, and I have had I've had to kind of do exactly what you said, like work around what is possible, what can I get. And fortunately, I've never had any bad experiences but it did make a difference when I was a younger artist to not be able to work from home. If I was in a neighborhood, if I couldn't establish myself as a working artist in a neighborhood that would somehow come up later and say, well, we don't allow this.
That's
so
right.
There's a weird sense of feeling like you can't really promote yourself at the same time be under the radar because you're not legally doing what you're supposed to be doing. So it's good to know that, especially because I do have a lot of young artists, young creative entrepreneurs who have a lot of good ideas, but are afraid to address the government. They don't know what obstacles might be out there, so they're kind of under the radar. So it's just nice to think about making that kind of information accessible to young people who might not go to the website and check it out because they're not really necessarily even making their money in Roanoke. They're working from home, doing things in other communities. So thank you for addressing that.
And that's a great point, because that ties into entrepreneurship, not just for artists and certainly artists, but not just for artists. It's like not everybody has a trust fund. Just go rent a a studio in downtown or retail storefront would cost to start their business, and so being able to start in out in the garage or upstairs in some home-based office is crucial. I mean, that's a great place for us to grow from the inside, for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that one. We also had Thomas had a question.
Thanks, Melissa. So my question, I would love to hear, well, yeah, for Chris and Angela, if there be any insights we can gain from what I wanted to ask about. So I was thinking about some of each of their comments about, good comments about equity and greenlining and housing policies, and I was thinking about and I want to be careful how I phrase this, but I think that there are some wonderful efforts and measures that entities are doing to create affordable housing options for residents in the Roanoke area. I see those affordable housing options usually manifest in terms of like rental options, right? Like affordable rental housing. And I want to do more homework on this topic, and I'd love to see if you all could point me in the right direction or tell me if there's any appetite that's been expressed for like affordable housing equity opportunities for residents of our community for whom the barriers of entry for home ownership are just way too high. And I think about the the results of like free enterprise, right? So I'm not trying to poo-poo free enterprise. Plenty of large, powerful institutions that want to create dwellings that can be leased at market rate. So I'm not trying to poo-poo that, but at the same time, I just want to know, has there been any expressed appetite for some alternative methods for building equity, even if it's in a limited way? I've done a little bit of reading on some stuff that looks a lot different and would probably look a lot different here, but in some other areas that have, whether it be like land banking opportunities for maybe like income restricted individuals to have like an equity stake in the place that they're renting, and they're really owning it, where they can own and maybe resell the improvements on the land that's owned by some impartial independent body that can allow people to buy and sell, as opposed to just paying rent. And I don't know, these are just things that kind of intrigue me, and I'm just wondering if you all have heard or seen any appetite for some alternative methods of affordable housing in the area.
So I'll put on my TAP hat for just a moment. Having worked with the city of Roanoke, we had the opportunity to build homes for home ownership. And as some shifts happened in the market, we found ourselves with some housing stock. And so we talked with the city about how do we provide, an option for quality housing for individuals or families, and as well meet the needs of the city and HUD by fulfilling our requirements. And so what we came up with was a lease purchase program. And so we actually had a family that went through housing counseling, and they were probably about maybe 18 months or so away from being ready to purchase. And so we drafted and created a lease purchase program with the assistance of city staff. And so that provided an opportunity for that family to lease that home for a couple of years, and then ultimately take over the ownership. And so that was a great example of being able to do that. Our role in terms of the community development block grant funds as they are now, we work with a whole host of nonprofit organizations that do great work, everything from rehabilitation on the limited side to home ownership, and creating that opportunity for families through Habitat for Humanity. One of the things that we have seen has been the need to revitalize communities in the sense of being able to access properties that are derelict, vacant, not being cared for, or vacant land where you may have a property owner who is no longer within the city. And so we looked at how other places were dealing with that, and they were using land banking as a model. And we looked to Richmond, the Maggie Walker Land Trust and Land Bank were moving forward to address those problems within the city of Roanoke. And so we proposed an idea for Roanoke that could be used. And so the city was very interested in that. Long story short, put out an RFP, and our agency did respond to that. And we have been designated as the land bank for the city of Roanoke. And that gives us the opportunity to acquire property. And our mission is that we would acquire those properties so that they could be made available to any nonprofit organization that is seeking to provide affordable housing. And whether that affordable housing is homeownership or whether that is rental or other models, that's our goal, is to provide the property to them. So as we've been on this journey and learning all we can about how to set up the land bank and how to have it be able to sustain itself over time, we've been looking at funding opportunities, and the city is looking at the resources that they recently received to provide a portion of that to the land bank in order to begin the acquisition of some of those properties that maybe on the tax sale, or maybe just simply you have a out-of-state owner that is no longer interested in caring for the property. So we are still in the infancy, if you will, of a land bank and trying to roll all of this out. So we're trying to get our feet under us and move that along. So.
Another thing that we could do, and we get approached from time to time by folks wanting to, or who are interested in kind of inquiring about tiny house developments. And that's fine. And we've said yes, and we would encourage that. We don't really have anything standing in the way that would prevent that. But I'm intrigued by just coming up with a small house development. A couple of examples of this, I think it's 14th Street over in Hurt Park and Norwich. They have entire neighborhoods of houses that sit on 3,000 square foot lots. And the house is perhaps under 800 square feet, probably more like in the 500 square foot. And they're called shotgun houses. You know, we've been building, pre-2008, and I don't think we've really gotten away from it, but building value based on square footage. And I don't see many folks out there building just small houses for people to go buy and not and be able to afford it. And so I think that's a real part of the market that's just not being created. And so and again, you know, the way that Roanoke is set up, we're 95% developed. So we're looking at, find a few acres and build a small, you can actually build a small neighborhood with that. Also, the townhouse form is extraordinarily efficient, and it gives you the flexibility of having an ownership or rental situation. And so again, very economic to build too. And also in terms of energy costs and party walls and things like that, there's a lot of advantage to that. So, I would encourage folks to look in those areas of not so much square footage, but good quality, small houses, cottages and things like that really we just don't have here. Don't have much of.
And just to pick up, I know that Richmond City, Maggie Walker has both arms. They are a land bank and a land trust. We haven't gotten there yet. We've been trying to get ourselves established in one area, and it may be that we may move into that area as a land trust. But we're kind of taking just a few steps just to kind of move ourselves in the right direction. So.
And I saw a question about the co-housing developments. We almost had one at the that was going to go onto the countryside property, but they just couldn't make it work. But I went and looked at a number at one down 81 off the Creeper Trail, matter of fact, that is just spectacular and would work so well and would fit into a neighborhood setting so well. And it's just a beautiful concept and a great way for people who are kind of aging out of their large single family splancher and are looking for alternatives where you have, and for those who aren't familiar with it, it's lots of different kind of single family or townhouse dwellings oriented toward a central around us, like a central or common building that may indeed have some residential units, but there's like communal eating and cooking and crafts and all the things that people do, and it's just really a nice concept that helps avoid the isolation that elderly people experience and even in their own neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think there's some other communities looking at that for exactly the reason that Kathy just put in the chat, that if there aren't those options there, we can lose some people in the community. Richard just asked, what's to prevent speculators from buying up the properties Angela's talking about so disadvantaged folks are frozen out of getting them? And I suppose that's part of the strategy, right, Angela?
Right. And ideally, we've got to get ourselves in a position where we're a couple of years ahead of where organizations may target their efforts, so that we kind of have that ability to kind of go in quietly and try to acquire, because of course, once things are public, then there can be the tendency for people to think, well, they're going to buy it from me. Let me try to raise and see what I can get. There could be that case. Some of the communities that we're looking at, if there were developers that were interested in those communities and going to do the right thing, why haven't they done them? Before now, why haven't they done them? So it has really been, I think, in some cases, the nonprofit organizations that have kind of gone in with the assistance of the city to kind of lay that foundational work. And then you see the trickle of others coming in to make more investments.
Thanks, Angela. One of the biggest pieces of all of this conversation is the kind of, the will and determination and the ability to say, we know what kind of community we want to be, and we're able and ready to organize to make it happen. And that organization happens in a variety of ways. Everything from a small nonprofit that's helping to renovate homes, help people renovate their homes, to our community action agency, TAP. Troy and Hunter just mentioned that they're in a community group that's discussing a community land trust as well. So I want to open it up to the group. And one of the questions, we decided not to break into the small groups because we're having such a good conversation as a whole group. But one of the small group questions was, what are some of the organizations that you're involved in? How are they working in alignment with this? And we want to give you an opportunity to talk about some of your efforts. And so, Troy and Hunter, since you mentioned that, let me go to you. I can't hear you. Are you muted or?